Ecstasy. The debate continues. Tonight, more breakthrough science in our unprecedented human trial of one of the most controversial drugs. Does ecstasy kill or could it cure? Plus, an ex-MP and the actor Keith Allen on a specially prepared 83-milligram dose. Good evening. Last night, eminent scientists Professor David Nutt from Imperial College London and Professor Val Curran from University College London revealed some astonishing science about how ecstasy affects the brain.
Tonight, we take that into the real world. We'll reveal what actually is in the pills sold at Glastonbury. Was it really ecstasy, or just talcum powder, or something much worse? We'll see if ecstasy could help treat depression and post-traumatic stress. There'll be intense debate between Professor Nutt and his scientific opponents on just how harmful ecstasy is and what happened to the brains of former MP Evan Harris and actor Keith Allen when they entered the scanner.
Well, what a good place to start. How is your brain, Keith? You're, of course, no stranger to ecstasy, so I suppose it was a doddle for you.
No, not really. I think it's a myth about my drug taking, John, to be honest. I've never taken more than one at any given moment in time, ever. I haven't taken ecstasy for 7 years.
Really? So the trial?
No. Yeah.
How was it?
Yeah, it was interesting. Well, watch the film. I can't say too much until you see the film, but...
Well, but I mean, what was it like doing it in a tube in a hospital? An MRI scanner?
Well, it's really weird. I mean, the circumstances that I've ever taken E in have not been in a tube, you know. So I had to take that on board, obviously. Well, but to be brutally frank with you, it didn't have an effect on me.
Well, we'll see whether that pans out in the film. Evan Harris, you not only are a former MP, but you're a doctor. I mean, yeah. So why did you do it?
Well, firstly, I think it's very important to support scientific research. I've been a participant as a volunteer in other medical trials, particularly to make sure that people are aware they exist. And I think that the more we talk about drugs generally, the better it is for policymakers and for society. Because when it comes to helping young people, the right answer is never more ignorance. It's always more information, I think.
Well, now, later in the programme, we're going to find out what you think with the results of our huge drug survey. 18,000 of you have taken part online.
But first, let's remind you what that trial involved. It was a double-blind trial in which volunteers were tested a week apart, once with a placebo and once with 83 milligrams of MDMA, but no one knew when they were taking the ecstasy. They were then put through an MRI scanner to test their brain activity. Professor Nutt and Professor Curran, you ran the study. What were you hoping to get out of it? What was the aims? Professor Nutt.
We wanted to understand where ecstasy worked in the brain, because it's a fascinating drug in terms of the changes it produces in people's feelings. We wanted to find out whether those brain changes might be translatable into clinical benefits.
And Professor Curran, what were your aims?
Well, we were intrigued by the extraordinary psychological effects of MDMA, especially on interpersonal trust, and how those might be harnessed in terms of psychological therapies to help treatment.
Great, well, we will look at those results later. Last night, opinions were bitterly divided between those who argue ecstasy is too dangerous to mess with and those like Professors Nutt and Curran who argue that ecstasy may have important therapeutic benefits that we should be investigating. Tonight, we'll get to the bottom of it. Professor Nutt, Professor Curran and Professor Parrott, plus a number of other leading experts, are here in the studio to help us do that. So let's kick off the discussion by looking at Keith Allen's experience.
I'm interested in it because I don't think I've had proper E since 1988.
And then you have to drink all this water.
All of it?
Yeah.
I mean, every time I've taken this stuff, it's been in a social environment. I believe that there's no external stimuli, so it's just me and my brain.
You don't get it.
Well, while I was in the cigar tube, I was asked 3 times about what effect the MDMA was having on me, and I said no, none. As soon as I came out, and I looked at the light, I thought, hang on a minute, I've had something here. Well, it's definitely on it, isn't it? But there was no rush, you know, no extraordinary. Where am I going?
Just follow Robbie.
I was definitely light on my feet without a shadow of a doubt. I thought I was going to fall over. Maybe it's a boredom test. Halfway through. Oh my God.
So how you feeling?
I'd say I was on it.
Right.
Yeah. The what? Am I on it or off it? I'd say I was on it.
Right.
Yeah. Am I not?
Well, I don't know. Double blind.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Is it?
Yeah.
No, I think. No, I'm definitely. I can feel the. It's more a physical thing than.
Right.
It seems to be more a physical thing than a mental thing.
Right.
Unless I'm having a fucking brain hemorrhage or something coming out walking down the corridor.
Could you have just got up too quickly?
No. No, definitely not. I've definitely been given something. Test my blood now. But no, you were saying the pupils, you know.
Yeah, it's usually the pupils and the gurning.
Well, I'm a renowned gurner, so...
Maybe because there's no sort of sensory cues to...
Well, that's what it is. There's nothing, is there?
But now you're in here...
I mean, if I was in a tent with booze and what have you, and music, I'd probably be... I'd go mental. But I'm in here with you two.
Well, before we investigate Keith's brain, let's get back to the heart of the science, the brain itself. What did we learn last night? If we could just recap, David.
We learned 2 things, that the 2 major effects of MDMA we found in the brain. The first was in this circuit here, which we call the default mode network. And it's a part of the brain which essentially determines you, your personality, your sense of self. And in conditions like depression and stress, this circuit is over-connected. You see the light's getting brighter and there's a stronger connection here. And under MDMA, that connection dampens down, and in fact, it becomes disconnected. And if you look to the image here, you see blue means less connectivity.
That is Keith's brain, so let's be clear about that.
That's Keith's brain, and those blue regions are less connected under MDMA than they were normally, or they were under placebo.
So his emotional breaks have been sort of... They've been released, so he can fly.
Yeah, sort of negative experiences, negative thinking has been dampened down, and that's allowed him to feel, in his case, a little bit better, not a lot.
And that was our first key breakthrough
That's
last
right.
night. That's something you've never seen before.
We've seen it with other drugs which work on the serotonin system, but that's never been described with MDMA before.
Right, well, let's take a look at your brain. Well, it's in there somewhere, Keith. What's it like? What's it like? We just looked inside it. Look at it here. I mean, I know you've never seen it before, but the fact is that what David Nutt is saying is a factual, physical evidence that you were on MDMA, and you were sort of not sure that you were.
Oh, no, I mean, I'm really amazed looking at that, the way it's edited. I actually
That's not edited, that's your brain.
No, I mean, the film that went before it, I would put my house on the fact that I wasn't on MDMA. I thought I was on something, but not MDMA.
So you didn't feel any sort of sense of emotional freedom?
None
No
whatsoever.
euphoria?
No.
You're a disaster.
No, I'm not a disaster. I'm a control freak.
Ah, so you fought it?
No, I didn't fight it. No, not at all. I found myself actually spending all my time in there and doing the exercises afterwards and the questionnaires. I found myself thinking.
What were you thinking about?
Well, I was thinking about, for example, that exercise you gave us about trust.
Yeah.
You know, which is about looking at people's faces. My immediate reaction to that, both weeks, by the way, when I was on it and when I wasn't on it, was...
Well, you don't know when you were and when you weren't.
Well, no, I didn't. That's what I'm saying. But I had the same reaction in my mind, exactly the same. And it was, I cannot make a decision about a person's personality based on how they look. So I won't do it. So what I did was I invested £250 in every single person.
Terrific. We'll have more on that in a moment. Christian.
Thanks, John. Well, as you can imagine, thousands of you have been getting in touch. In fact, we have been trending worldwide on Twitter. And we've got plenty of tweets coming in. One, for example, is just that one tablet nearly ruined my life. I still get panic attacks from time to time, and now I'm 34. And another very common point is that a lot of people have been asking us whether there's a big difference between the MDMA that we've been using in the trial and the ecstasy that you can buy on the streets. Well, we wanted to find out, so have a look at the answer.
Glastonbury last year. As always, the police seized a lot of ecstasy tablets, but what was actually in them? In a television first, we've been allowed to test the pills seized by police at the festival. And these are the results. First, a third of the pills had no MDMA whatsoever. That's a third with no ecstasy at all. Instead, they were made up of caffeine, paracetamol, and illegal drugs like BZP and TFMPP. These psychoactive chemicals mimic the effects of MDMA, but they can cause vomiting, fits, and irregular heart rhythms. The other two-thirds did contain MDMA, but they were all cut with something else. Approximately half of each pill was a filler, like talcum powder or flour. In these pills, the doses of MDMA varied wildly, from 29 milligrams right up to 115 milligrams.
It is really worrying to think about how dangerous some of the other drugs are that have been cut into ecstasy. We found from our research at Glastonbury the average dose in the pills that did contain MDMA was 85 milligrams, almost the same as the 83 milligrams given to the volunteers on the trial. Now, whilst we are not encouraging anybody to take MDMA, if you are determined to take it, then Professor Curran's advice would be this: to test a small amount, leave it a few hours, and then see how you feel. So we'll see you after the break, when we'll talk to you about the safety and the dangers of ecstasy and the infamous come down.
Welcome back. We have talked about the highs, but we all know what goes up must come down. A lot of people that use ecstasy report feeling depressed a few days later, commonly known as the Tuesday blues. Take a look at this.
I was coming down for at least 2 days. Completely bedridden. Yeah. Completely bedridden. Couldn't move.
It won't take ages to get onto you, but once you're coming down, It could take...
You're coming down for as long as it takes.
3-4 days after, you're still feeling depressed. So...
The aftermath is horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, you feel... I've noticed from when I'm coming down, you can feel quite ill. So the next day, you feel pretty ill off it, so you just want to stay in bed all day, or you just want to watch TV all day. Haven't been able to work a lot of the time because I've been on it. So it does take a toll on your physical body.
You know, I would not take it on a Sunday and then turn up to work on Monday morning.
Oh, no, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, I need a good couple of days to, like, reflect and calm down.
So what's behind the Tuesday blues? Inside the neurons within your brain are tiny sacs full of serotonin. They are released to pass messages across the brain from cell to cell. If you take ecstasy, masses of serotonin is released in one big rush, changing the way you feel and think. The trouble is, ecstasy also stops the brain replenishing the serotonin for about 3 or 4 days. So by Tuesday, you're running out of this vital chemical, hence the Tuesday blues.
So that's ecstasy's equivalent of a hangover, I guess. I've been joined now by Professor Andrew Parrott. He's Professor of Psychology, and his colleague, Professor Philip Murphy, who both specialise in the effects of MDMA. Now, what about these Tuesday blues? You think they're rather more than Tuesday blues?
Well, we've compared cocaine users with ecstasy users in a recent study, and we've found that the ecstasy users have more prolonged recovery effects than the cocaine users.
Well, that leads us naturally into the whole question of long-term damage.
And there's certainly evidence in the literature, John, that the low mood states, the depression, the irritability, the anxiety can go on for months since the drug was last used. And this came out in one particular survey that was published last year. So it's much more than a short-term effect.
But you talk of one particular survey, but how much research into the actual human? I mean, one can do it with animals and the rest of it, but what about humans?
Yes,
The long-term effects are very damaging in humans. Serotonergic neurotoxicity has been demonstrated in lots of trials, and they've also correlated the level of reduced serotonin
trials
in the brain
in humans,
with the level of, they tested MDMA in the hair of people, so it is MDMA. They've also correlated the deficits.
I'm sorry,
with
that's
the amount
really
of,
misleading,
with the amount
actually,
of,
Andy.
if I can finish, with the amount of lifetime MDMA use, they've given people memory tests and correlated the low memory with both lifetime ecstasy use and the reduced serotonin. That's
as you can
Kish
detect,
et al. Published in the journal Brain.
As you can detect, there's some conflict here. Val?
I think there are several of us here who've done these long-term effects, have done brain imaging on people who've taken ecstasy for different periods of time. And the vast majority of scientists would agree that while you're taking ecstasy, there is some change to the serotonergic system in the brain. But when you stop taking the drug, you get, on the whole, recovery from that. And also the midweek, the Tuesday blues, you might get some dip. But as many of our studies have shown, it's no longer there at a week.
There's more than the one survey. I was only citing that as one example. Studies that I've been involved in, we've had groups of former users. In some cases, it's been 2 years since they last used. They show deficits in memory.
But there's a great division, isn't there, which is represented here, and you are in a minority, no?
I wouldn't necessarily say that. I don't necessarily think
I would say two things. The first, I would say two important things. The first is that in this study, with 83 milligrams in a hospital condition, when we looked at the mood of the volunteers 3 days after placebo or MDMA, there was no difference. So I believe that a lot of the mood effects are due to taking it in a situation at night where you disrupt your sleep, where you dance all night and maybe take other drugs and alcohol. So in the medical setting, the Tuesday blues didn't occur.
That takes us to the nub, though, of this issue, because this is a trial on humans in very clinical conditions. And I'm wondering, what do you think of this trial? Are you pleased it's taking place? Is it valuable?
There may be clinical potential. There may be clinical potential. It may be. It may be. I can't say anything more than that. It may be. But it's a world away from using ecstasy in the outside world.
Professor Barrett, the actual physiological discoveries that we've made here, are they of value or are they not?
One of the interesting things is the person who didn't have an effect had used it previously, and that's known as chronic tolerance. This is very common. So regular users up their dosage. They need to take 2 or 3
he
tablets.
He hadn't taken it for 7 years.
Well,
and he only ever took 1 dose.
Yes.
Well,
1 dose a night.
Yes.
1 dose a night.
So they are upregulated
Most regular users need to up their dosage.
Did you accept the existence of chronic tolerance?
Tolerance is a well-understood mechanism, and you do get tolerance when people take the drug every twice a month, as most people do.
But when you discover, as we've seen in the brain there, that how the drug actually operates on the emotional system, so that is an exciting discovery, is it not?
There are lots of studies which have looked at ecstasy users and brain function. We've done studies in Swansea where we've looked at brain function of ecstasy users, and we found that they're poorer. Their brain function is poorer when they're doing memory tasks. You get less activation in the areas of the brain responsible for memory, and these are people who've taken ecstasy, and the areas of the brain responsible for memory are damaged.
I'm sorry, but if you look at the best studies, like ones that have been done in Holland, the Ecstasy study shows that any effect on memory is temporary and it's tiny. It's equivalent of having a 30-word item shopping list. You'd forget 1 item if you used ecstasy.
David Nutt?
Yeah, I mean, the scale of the changes that have been observed in all these studies are very small, as Val's pointed out. In fact, the ACMD, when it did its major review, it did a very systematic analysis and came to the conclusion that the effects were trivial. And they're not in the clinical range. They're not remotely the same as you see.
Mike Morgan tested former users who recalled 4 words, current non-users 8 words. So the former users were 50%.
And the problem with all that research is you don't necessarily know what they're taking.
Here I'm going to have to call time. I'm going to call time because we've got lots of people in here who have indeed experienced MDMA. Let's go to Christian.
It is hotting up. Well, I'm here with Phil, one of our volunteers we saw last night. He's a former SAS man, and you actually felt, well, not great all the way through it, but particularly bad afterwards. You think you probably did experience the Tuesday blues?
Definitely. I've had some Olympic hangovers, proper hangovers in my time, honestly, and I felt like an empty windsock.
You did. And why did you take part in this trial? Remind us.
Well, you know, it was sold to me on the fact that there's some good could come out of this. It could help soldiers that got PTSD, and that was my only driving motivation to come on this, so that you could take a product, I don't care the fact that it's a Class A drug, a product, and take it to an end of a soldier with PTSD, and if we can help them out, we can help them out. If we can't, then we can say we can't, we can put it to bed and you can all go away.
All right, so PTSD was your main interest, and let's just remind viewers what post-traumatic stress disorder is. It's an anxiety disorder that can develop following any kind of severe trauma, and one of the symptoms is often flashbacks. Now, with me is Adam Winstock. He's a consultant psychiatrist, and he specialises in addiction. And as doctors, we really need to make this clear for people. When we prescribe drugs, we accept that there are always risks that go hand in hand with these drugs, aren't they? And we have to weigh that up. Do you think there are real dangers with ecstasy?
I mean, I think you're right. There are side effects with prescription drugs, with drugs that people use for fun. And I think the question is whether or not those benefits that people get from drugs they take when they go clubbing or prescription drugs outweigh those things. And I think for symptoms of PTSD, we don't have effective enough treatments. And if we can offer another way of helping those people, that's important.
So what are then the long-term risks that you have seen in ecstasy?
I don't think you can tie it down to an absolute risk. It varies what people do. I think what most people who use drugs will accept is the more they use, the longer they use, and the more varied the drugs they use, the higher those risks will be. What people need is a way of reflecting on those harms in a way that allows them to make smart decisions using something like the drugs meter that says, I can think around my own drug use. Do I see people seeking treatment for MDMA dependence in the clinic I work in? No. Do I see people damaged in the way alcohol and heroin does? No.
And it may well be then the substances that they mix with ecstasy that cause the real problems. Listen, we have to move on, but thank you for that. We're going to move away from talking about the recreational use of ecstasy and go back to the trial and its potential therapeutic use. Now, we know historically that MDMA was used for therapy, and it still is, particularly in America, even though it's illegal. And we managed to film one of these underground sessions. Take a look at this.
Somewhere on America's west coast, Danielle is about to undergo a therapy session using MDMA. It's totally illegal. She's been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, following an abusive childhood.
I was raised by a father who had a very tragic and unhappy life of his own and took that out on 2 of his children. The violence was very unpredictable in my house, and that resulted in a lifetime of anxiety for me.
Danielle's first MDMA session was a year ago. She'd never previously taken a Class A drug.
It was a little bit scary for me because I'd never done any sort of psychedelic substance before. I had no experience with it at all.
First, before taking the MDMA, Danielle and her therapist decide what they're going to focus on. Today, it's the recent death of her abusive father.
I feel like I haven't sort of dealt with it in the way that I probably need to.
Her therapist only agreed to take part on condition that she was unidentifiable in this program. She faces a long prison sentence if caught.
I run a lot of risks. It is illegal, and from a professional point of view, it's very harshly condemned. But I believe in the power of this tool. I've seen the results in many people.
MDMA makes you more willing to talk about things that you otherwise just really don't want to talk about. That's it, just like a vitamin. Sometimes you have very fixed ideas about who you are and how things should be, and the drug is showing you there's another way to look and widen your perspective about your life. It's hard to let my jaw relax. It's tense, my jaw.
Yeah, it's okay.
Oh, I don't feel good right now.
You don't feel good?
Mm-mm. It just feels really strong all of a sudden.
Yeah, okay.
An hour in, and as the drug takes hold, the therapy session begins in earnest.
I don't think anything excuses treating a child the way that he treated me. But when I think about how hard his life was and how sad it was, and that he died so young, it makes me sad because I
feel that sadness.
Yeah, I do.
At his funeral, I was just thinking,
you know, he's dead, and that's sad, but I'm okay.
There's no way of knowing if it's the use of MDMA by Daniel's therapist that has made her feel better. But she certainly believes that it's finally helping her overcome PTSD following a decade of conventional treatments that she says have failed.
There's been just an overall general reduction in my day-to-day anxiety. It's like my anxiety was up here and now it's, you know, down here. It's just come down. I'm willing to be filmed taking the drug because I'm hoping that people look at this and it will open their minds a little bit and maybe change some perceptions about what it is and how it can help lots of people.
MDMA as an aid to helping sufferers from PTSD go from agony to ecstasy? Really? After the break. Now, before the break, we saw a MDMA therapy session. Professor Valkaran, you were very interested in posing negative thoughts to people in the MRI scan. Why did you want to do that?
We wanted to see if MDMA could change negative memories, just as yesterday we saw how positive memories were enhanced. And we were particularly interested in negative memories, which are key symptoms of some psychological disorders, like depression, but also like PTSD, as we've just seen.
I mean, that is a very big nut to crack, isn't it? Let's face it. Is it really plausible that you could?
I think it is plausible in the sense that we showed how MDMA can enhance trust. So if you build MDMA into psychological therapies, and we see how it acts on the brain, then...
Well, let's go look at the brain, David, and see exactly what's happening when you're triggering negative thoughts like this. Where did all this make any kind of a difference?
So, like last night, memories coordinated by the hippocampus, the blue bit here. When people are remembering negative memories, two other regions are activated. The amygdala here, which is a kind of emotional nerve center, and this prefrontal cortical region, which is part of this default mode network we talked about before. Now, what we find is that under MDMA, this high-level control region here, this prefrontal region, is switched off. And you can see that up there.
Let's look at, oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, previously we saw Keith's brain, which had blue dots both sides, one switched off.
This one is switched off.
Dramatic.
And that switching off means that people are able to engage with the traumatic memories without the huge emotional overlay, which can then interfere with therapy. So as we saw in that particular clip, the person can remember the problem with the father, but control the emotions and therefore deal with it intellectually.
This is amazing. If I'm right, you're saying that you can physically see through the MRI of this slice of the brain the dampening down of, and actually almost extinguishing of negative emotion.
That's right, exactly right. You're seeing that under MDMA, the memories are less emotional, they're less negative, because you dampen down this emotional center.
Well, now, we're not suggesting you use MDMA as a treatment for PTSD, but if you or any of your friends or relatives are using MDMA as a therapeutic tool and want advice, or if you're taking any illegal substances and want to talk to someone in confidence, log on to our website, channel4.com/drugslive. Now, I'm going to talk to Hayley, who we met last night. She was a volunteer. She is a priest. And you talked a lot last night about this sort of euphoria and the rest of it. But what you didn't tell us is what we're going to see in your film tonight, which is that you did suffer from PTSD.
I did, yes. I suffered from PTSD after a personal assault, which became complex PTSD because it happened within a series of other traumatic events, which is a bit more difficult to resolve.
Well, we'll see from the film that something very remarkable happened in the trial. What I want to know right now, before we see the film, is whatever happened still with you now?
Absolutely.
This is incredible. Let's have a look at it. Let's have a look at the film.
I had experienced post-traumatic stress myself after an assault, and I experienced very much people not knowing how to treat it, but it was a very difficult and painful journey.
Hayley, if you could open your eyes again. We are now getting ready for the first task. Questions will appear on the screen.
That was a placebo, that's some placebo.
I think we're all pretty certain you were on the drug today.
Yeah. Sorry, I just feel really happy.
You really don't have to apologise.
Joy.
How was it with the different memories? Because you had 3 of your worst memories essentially to remember, and then 3 of your very best. How were they felt? You know, the positive and the negative.
Well, I think the thing with PTSD particularly is you can't reach those emotions. So you can't express them. Suddenly you're left with this anger that you've never experienced before. You're disconnected to the people that mean most to you. It's just horrible. I experienced the PTSD through an assault that I had, and actually I thought that's the first time I've actually shown emotion about it.
Right.
So in a sense, I actually saw that as being a good thing.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
It's that reconnecting, I think, so you can process it in your brain, and then your brain's free then to pick the good memories. It's not locked. There's something that's not locked there that's blocking it. I now have perfect recall of my assault, and I've never, ever had that before, despite the fact that I've come through the PTSD. You know, during the week, I've had a full memory recall in chronological order. Some of it I've even laughed at and thought, oh, and I thought to myself, oh, no wonder I got PTSD if that happened directly afterwards, you know, and I've never been able to do that before. So, yeah, it's clearly done something quite profound.
Well, I'm here once again with Andy Parrott. I mean, admittedly, this is only a relatively small sample size, but should this prove a useful benefit? Because treatments for PTSD are not always successful, are they? Do you not think this is a valid reason for continuing with this trial and investigating this further?
Well, again, I mentioned yesterday it's an unpredictable drug, and if we look at the previous trial published about 20 years ago, 2 of the people there had abreactions to the drug, and 1 needed drug-free therapy to cope with the problems which had been raised during the MDMA therapy session. So it is unpredictable. And my view of therapy is there are far better, safer therapies without using drugs. So my belief is that it would be longer lasting if you had a therapy without drugs. My concern is that the drug therapy might be a shorter acting change.
So you still don't concede that the benefits to this will outweigh the risks?
Oh, my view of MDMA is it's so damaging to so many brain systems that I don't think it's a safe drug. I don't think it should be given to humans.
Well, you are not alone in this. I mean, we're going to stay on the issue of PTSD, and I've got here Darren Martins. You are a war veteran, and you suffer currently from PTSD, don't you?
Yes. Well, currently without... I've gone through an alternative treatment called NLP, and I haven't relapsed at all yet. So
you haven't, but what are your views on using ecstasy as a treatment?
I've got to be honest, I'm still on the fence at the minute. The show's...
That's allowed, don't worry.
Switched me back and forth as I've been watching it.
But tell me why that was. What made you pro, and then what made you anti?
Well, the pro, obviously, I can see from the show there are significant benefits from the drug. I think Hayley's obviously benefited from it in some way. However, I know that from experience, it is a mind-expanding drug, and it can leave you with some sort of profound questions in your thoughts, and long after you've taken the drug, they stay with you, and I think they could lead to maybe depression and things. And you know, I'm no doctor, but that's possible.
But currently, this treatment is not for you. Well, I know we've got Mr. Matt Southwell over here, who you have tried MDMA in various therapies, haven't you? What are your views on it?
Well, I've been an ecstasy user for 28 years. I'm also a drugs worker by background. I was in the therapy in the 1990s, and my psychotherapist noticed that every 3 months I was having these major therapeutic breakthroughs. And
you weren't using ecstasy during therapy?
Not during therapy, but when we tracked back, the major therapeutic breakthroughs happened every time I was taking ecstasy.
All right, that's interesting. Well, John, I bet your Twitter is going wild, isn't it?
It is going wild, and there's a really interesting sort of complementary pair here. There's Mike. I am an ex-serviceman, and from my experience of this drug, I would not recommend it for PTSD. I got to a point where I could only cope when on it, and the rest of the time I felt so depressed. And then there's Sarah. I took E a lot through the 90s while suffering from undiagnosed PTSD. It allowed me to function and eventually to be able to discuss my trauma. Well, there you have that same division and dichotomy that you described. Now, ultimately, it is not scientists who will decide what's legal and what's illegal. It's MPs. So naturally, we contacted a range of politicians to volunteer for our human trial. Only one was brave enough to agree, former Liberal Democrat MP and Dr. Evan Harris. Let's see how he got on.
This is Evan's second visit to the test centre. As an experienced politician, he's forthright about why he's taking part.
One of the reasons that I'm interested in participating is to see what the effect is. I mean, I'm most interested in helping get the research done and advocating that people should volunteer for phase 1 safety studies of potentially beneficial medicines. So we'll see what happens. I have an open mind as to what to expect.
On his first visit, he showed no response, so he suspects that this time he'll be getting ecstasy.
Just got to send one email.
It's going to be your last email for a while, because after the scan we're going to be asking you lots of questions, so we can't...
But right now, it's emails, not E, that's getting his attention.
Until I know it's sent.
So I'm just going to give you the tablet now.
Okay.
Yep. Do you want to get those to me now? And then
I'm all right.
We're gonna leave the room. See you in a bit.
An hour in, and 83 milligrams of pure MDMA should be showing some effect. But Evan's not feeling it.
No, I think he's going to be one of those annoying ones that rates it 0 all the way through and then gets up and goes, wow, afterwards. We've had a few of those.
In the control room, they are seeing one telltale sign of ecstasy, dilated pupils. And Evan's brain scans show the classic signature of MDMA. But incredibly, Evan isn't at all sure whether he's on the placebo or the drug.
So you think you've got nothing again?
Probably, but I'm going to go to the Luton.
Yeah, you go on there.
You know where it is.
Yes.
Time for the scientist to ask some questions.
what about any physical effects you've noticed during the scan?
I feel different. I'm not sure if it's lightheaded.
Do you feel loved up?
No, I wouldn't say so.
No, you don't feel any emotional connection to anyone here or anyone you've bumped into in the course of the study or anything like that?
No, sorry.
It's a dramatic change from the eloquent politician of 2 hours earlier, but Evan's still not recognising the effects.
If you could be with anybody right now, who would it be?
No one in particular.
But can the computer tests uncover any changes in his psychology?
Okay. And just, yeah, have a seat at the computer over there.
Evan's face starts to tell the story. That looks suspiciously like he's gurning, jaw-clenching, a classic response to ecstasy. But after 4 hours with the drug wearing off, he's more like his old self.
I do think I had MDMA today, but I'm only 70% sure because I didn't feel I had any emotional symptoms. Physically, I felt some effects, although again, that could be due to lying down for an hour and a half in a clinical situation in an MRI machine. God, I'd be tedious in a nightclub, wouldn't I? Just thinking. Imagine.
Well, Evan Harris has joined me now. Bit of a disappointment, like Keith Allen, and yet you probably were on it.
I don't know who it's a disappointment to, it's how I felt. I didn't feel any euphoria. I tried to think hard when I was asked those questions. And answer immediately, no, go away.
Think
but
hard
clearly
now.
I had the physical effects.
Think hard now. Supposing you were an MP again, and Parliament was looking at the question of whether there should be the legal opportunity for therapeutic use of this drug, would you support it?
Well, it's not a question for Parliament. It'll be decided by the medical authorities. There's no provision in law for...
Well, I'll put you in the medical authorities because you're a doctor.
It'll depend on the,
would you support it?
It'll depend on the science, and that's why we need to have the scientific studies. And, of course, in any scientific controversy, you have people on both sides, and you heard from two people on this side before. But the key thing is to get proper reviews done. And David's Advisory Council did a complete review and argued
well,
one
let me
view,
tell
and
you,
politicians take another.
this is absolute music to the professors, because they are looking for further funding for more research on this. And you, as a politician and a doctor, support
What
us.
I worry
I've got to
about
thank you
is
now
that the
because
ministers will
we're gonna
back the tabloid editors.
We're going to have to move on. After the break, we will be revealing your opinions with the results of our big drugs survey. 18,000 people have taken part. That's coming up on Drugs Live. Welcome back. Now, over the past 24 hours, thousands of Channel 4 viewers have been taking part in our online survey. Now, we're not suggesting this represents national opinion, but we hope it is a good litmus test on illegal drug use in the United Kingdom today.
Absolutely. So in terms of who took part, a huge 80% said they had taken ecstasy before. So let's look at the first result. In answer to the question, do you think the government's policy on drugs is working? An overwhelming 94% said no.
And in answer to the question, do you think MDMA should be legalised? 60% said yes, and I think a rather surprising 40% said no. So that's really interesting. Remember, most of these people take ecstasy, and nearly half think it should stay illegal.
And how do people perceive the dangers associated with ecstasy? Well, in answer to the question, does MDMA pose long-term health risks? 40% said they thought MDMA causes no long-term risk to health. The other 60% thought they did or were still undecided. So again, among users, quite a lot are aware of the dangers, but are doing it anyway. Our survey reflects a whole range of opinions about this controversial drug, and we've got a whole range of opinions coming up on Twitter. So let's have a look. So first of all, we've got a comment from Mark. I agree with many that alcohol is more damaging physically, but I think the mental implications of taking ecstasy and cannabis is something to note. Other comments saying, I once took some MDMA crystals that were cut with a dirty stimulant of some time and had a terrible time, overdose and pains in my head for days afterwards. John, did you get any?
No, you carry on.
We've got another one here. The danger of taking MDMA is when people aren't mentally prepared for the altered state of mind. And let's have a look. We've got some more over here. As a student, I'm disappointed with the education teenagers are receiving with regard to drugs.
Right. Keith, have you heard anything which makes you feel, after listening tonight, that perhaps you should give it up?
No.
Really? You're
No.
just comforted by the very
Nothing
fact that
at all.
you're sitting just close to Evan. You two are just resistors.
No, not at all. I'm not a resistor to it at all. I have a different way of engaging with the drug. If I was in a tent in Glastonbury, then I wouldn't be doing that. I'd be doing something else.
Well, you'd probably be on talcum powder.
Not knowing the people I know, John.
But let me ask you from a completely different perspective. What about Hayley's story? That is an extraordinary and uplifting thing, is it not?
Hayley is the ordained priest.
She is.
Is that right?
And she is the person who
Yeah, I tell you what,
seems to have got in touch with really important memory.
Can I ask one thing here? Were you on the drug or on a placebo when you had that revelation?
It was in the days afterwards that actually I had the memory recall.
But do you know if you had been on the drug or was
I had been, yes.
Oh, you had?
Yeah.
Okay. Because actually I was just thinking you could have had that revelation maybe a week later when you'd had the placebo because of who you are.
But
No,
it's
it was
not
definitely-
data, is it? That's a single story, it's anecdote. What you need to do to make decisions on this is look at the published research when it's all done and then review all the data that's out there. And I say that's what expert bodies do. My concern is that politicians ignore them.
Christian.
Can I...
It's what we want to know is, have any of you had your minds changed by what you've heard tonight? Madam, can I ask you,
Of course, yeah.
what are your thoughts?
Well, I've had a negative experience with MD once. However, I believe that was completely my fault. I was irresponsible with it, and I had the negative effects. I had complete dysphoria. I felt sick. I had a terrible come down for a week, but it was my own fault. It was my first time clubbing. I didn't know the people. I wasn't in the right mental state, as someone said before.
So environment is clearly important.
Environment, and I think you need to be ready and you need to know what to expect and know what a drug does to you before you take it, and I think that's very important in safety.
Absolutely. And you say you are a drugs counsellor, is that right?
Kind of. I'm a substance misuse practitioner.
Even better terminology than I could possibly use. Tell me your thoughts.
You just mentioned that being informed before you do something is a good idea. Yeah, being informed, I don't think that you can...
You'd agree? It's about education in this.
It's about being informed about what you're doing and don't...
John, we've got to go to you. Sorry, we've got to leave
Val, what single thing do you want to take away from this trial and from these 2 hours of transmissions that we've made these 2 successive nights?
I think I want to take away the psychological effects of MDMA and how they might be used in therapy. But I also take away the opportunity we've had to share with a television audience how we actually do the science of looking at the effects of MDMA.
David, one thing you can take away from this entire experience?
Well, 3 things. 3 major changes in brain function attributable to MDMA, very novel neuroscientific findings.
And David, what we all want to know really is what happens next? What's the plan next for you?
So we've got permission to do a clinical trial of MDMA and PTSD, and we hope to take that forward over the next year.
And we wish you the best of luck. Let's hope it happens.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Well, hopefully the science will continue. It's been a fascinating journey. It's revealed those 3 major scientific breakthroughs. I think it's been one of these very, very rare television experiences. I've certainly never been on a journey. I feel I've been on a journey to somewhere I never knew existed.
Yeah, no, it has actually been incredible.
And we have, as you say...
We've had some important discussions on the risks associated with ecstasy, and I hope that they have sparked off and will continue to spark off some really important ongoing debate.
So, look, a big thank you to you, but to the scientists here, wonderful, wonderful people who conducted this trial.
Absolutely.
And especially to the volunteers who took part, and indeed to everybody who's been involved. From both of us, good night.
Good night.
If you've been affected by the issues raised in this programme, you can find help and support links on our website at channel4.com/drugslive.